The next morning, the sky was already blanketed with thick clouds, and it seemed as though it would rain. Konoe didn't get much sleep again that night, so he got out of bed in the early afternoon. He couldn't shake the thoughts of the green and yellow snakes, and as a result, he felt irritated. The first thing Konoe did when he got up was check for any holes through which a small animal could have crawled into his home. Again, I don't think they were small animals. The way they were described, they seemed pretty large, but maybe they were. Maybe they're small. But there were none to be found. Annoyed, he scratched at the ground. Konoe was about to get up and head out when he heard something striking on his door. Konoe listened closely. He heard rough breathing on the other side. It seemed that someone was outside. Taking a low profile, Konoe silently approached the door. He pressed his back to the wall and watched. The other person was still there. Konoe still heard restless breathing. Was this person injured? Not dropping his guard, Konoe tried to carefully open up the door. Through the gap of the door, he saw the clothes of the other person. "Hey," Konoe called out. There was no answer. Suddenly, he felt a force against the door. This was bad. Konoe pulled back at once. The door flew open and a cat pounced. The cat was heaving for air and had an aura of bloodthirst about him. His ears were laid back flat, and Konoe furrowed his brows. It was gone. The cat's left ear was missing. The cat exhaled a threatening breath and looked up. "Oh. Hello again." Konoe unintentionally gasped. The cat's eyes glared with an intense light, but it was only the right eye. There was a black hole in the place where his left eye should have been. Even though it was hollowed out, it didn't seem like an injury. It was just like the left ear. It just stopped existing. The sickness. The cat bared his fangs. The sickness. It was a mysterious disease that became widespread about 3 years ago. Organs would disappear overnight, accompanied by fever and excruciating pain. The mortality rate was high. The onset rate was low, but for females it was different. The onset rate was high for them, and death was almost certain. Because of this, females were scarce. The cat raised his voice in a cry and pounced. He lashed out with his sharp claws. Konoe jumped back immediately to retaliate. However, it was hard to do so in such a small space. The cat scowled at Konoe, as if upset that he had returned his attack. There was no light in his eye, as if he had lost his sanity. The cat kicked off the floor and threw himself on Konoe. Konoe dodged the arm that lashed out and retreated into his room. Konoe fixed his eyes on the cat. He remembered this face. That was it. Was he not the companion of the sacrificial cat? Yeah, he is. Ugh. The cat's anger boiled over, and he growled. Konoe didn't want to fight him. He felt feelings like sympathy spread through his chest. The other cat lost his companion, and had now developed the sickness himself. He was angry, but behind that, stagnating deep within, was endless sorrow and despair. Konoe lost the will to fight, and relaxed his body. His bristled tail returned to normal. The cat looked at him curiously for a moment, but then his expression intensified, and he bared his fangs, as though he thought he was being mocked. The cat's eye gleamed, and he rushed forward a third time. Konoe jumped aside and struck back to push the opponent against the wall. The cat failed to land his strike and flew into the wall. The cat now fell down in a whirlwind of dust, no longer moving. Konoe approached the cat. He looked at his empty eye socket and found it unbearable. The cat grimaced in pain and panted lightly. Konoe crouched down and tried to touch the shoulder of the fallen cat. He felt hot. The cat seemed to be running a fever. He trembled but did not resist him. Konoe couldn't leave him like that. He intended to take him to the shamanic healer. There wasn't any medicine that could cure him completely, but at least it could ease the pain somewhat. "Can you stand? I'm taking you to the healer, okay?" The cat shook his tail instead of answering with his voice. Konoe left the home while carefully supporting the other cat's body. Sweat dripped from the cat's skin, and from his rough breathing it was easy to tell that he was in a great amount of pain. Konoe was startled as he walked towards the healer. There were other cats crouching down and moaning throughout the whole village. There were people missing arms, legs, tails, and ears. It was an onset of the sickness. Until now, there had never been so many infected. Either way, Konoe only intended to get this cat to safety, so he headed for the home of the healer. I wonder if getting the attention of those snake things somehow brought the sickness here? Maybe. Other diseased cats were entering the healer's house. The aged medicine man was completely exhausted by the situation, and grumbled that this was the first time there had ever been an outbreak like this. The other cats in the house were whispering about whether or not this might have been a curse, a consequence from taking too many sacrifices. They were talking about leaving for Ransen. In Ransen, they didn't have sacrifices. Konoe heard that the void's damage also wasn't as severe there. Wait, stop. It said earlier that, like, the reason people didn't leave was because it was too far away for them to make it realistically without dying. But they could just all go to Ransen? Well, what the... Then why the fuck are they staying here in the first place? Because this is Crazy Town. Destination, we eat people. Or kitty people. Fuck. Okay, whatever. So he understood why they were considering it. By the time Konoe went home, the moon of the light was setting beyond the horizon. If it was decided that there was no saving a person who was infected with the sickness, the sick person was set aside as food. That doesn't seem very smart. Like, just on a purely practical level. Like, are you really gonna eat the thing that's got, like, this weird super disease that just consumes organs? doesn't seem very healthy. Understanding this, Konoe felt disconcerted. Understandably so. A melody floated on the wind. Konoe stopped and looked back. A lone cat was leaning in the shade under a tree. Oh. The cat was wrapped in several layers of clothing. A hood shrouded his face in shadow. Who's this? He carried a lute and strummed the strings with his fingers, humming a song and bouncing his tail to keep time. It was the poet. What, like Madonna? Like it just has a title? Okay. On certain days, the poet would wander in and sing freely, and then disappear without a trace. Before the void came, no one in Karou bothered to listen to him. They'd had little interest in anything outside of fighting. But now, it was different. Everyone left their home to listen to him sing. The songs of this whimsical musician healed the cat's deteriorating hearts. So true, too. Just having a bad day, put on some music, and just shut out all the world's problems. Yeah. The Ribika could not read the language of the toucans. Instead, they often used song, pictures, and letters that they created themselves to convey their thoughts. Songs were important. In battle and in daily life, one could not do without them. Well, wait. Why is he called the poet if he's a musician? I mean, it doesn't seem like he sings, like lyrics. So what poems is he creating to be a poet? Okay. If he looked around, Konoe could see that several cats were enchanted by the poet's song. The poet sang, oh, he does sing, in a relaxed, low tone, a delicate sound echoing whenever his fingers plucked the strings. It was an incredible harmony of voice and sound, and Konoe began to walk towards the poet. Oh, is he like the Pied Piper who like goes through the town with the flute and would like mesmerize all like the rats or cats and animals that people wanted to be rid of, and they'd pay the Pied Piper to get rid of them? Maybe I'm reaching. I don't know, but it's okay. He kept a modest distance and sat down, tense for some reason. This intensity with which my body burns feeds on bitterness and sweetness. Every time I say that name, every time your image is imprinted into my mind, I turn into a sparking and bursting... No, come back! So... I mean, if you want to pause the video and go back and look at those, because it's not in the log. It shows up as... in the Japanese. It's not translated in the log, sadly. Okay. Fuck. Konoe closed his eyes. The poet's voice gradually permeated his ears, and a mysterious comfort soothed him from within. The melody of the lyrics rolled over his head. He blankly thought about their meaning. The poet put away the past and told a dreamlike story through his song. Love. How many cats believed in such a thing now, in a world where they devoured each other just to survive? The sudden decline in females had weakened the cat's instincts to bring up another generation. Perhaps because of this, a lot of cats engaged in same-sex relationships. But as a species, they had not lost the need to struggle on. In their everyday lives, fearing death and starvation, they could not waste energy on things that were unnecessary. Thus, Ribika had distanced themselves from romantic dreams of love and affection. The bittersweet flames, where do they now flow? Feelings flow from the voice of the poet to Konoe's heart. He noticed he'd begun to purr, and wondered if maybe this was a love song. Although it was stifling, it was also a delightful and mysterious feeling. Konoe slowly opened his eyes, as if coming out of a dream. What a nice song, he said softly. Konoe murmured the words without thinking. The poet stopped singing and turned his face towards Konoe. His lips curled into the faintest of smiles. His fingertips danced over the strings without a care. Konoe felt his tail bristle out, though he didn't know why. For some reason, he began to feel a little sad. Konoe stared at the poet. What was this sensation? Though he had listened to him sing before, this was the first time he'd felt this way. Afterwards, the poet sang more songs about lost love and fierce battles. Eventually, he stood up and departed from the cats who were indulging in his music. Konoe, who'd listened to the very end, Now looked up. Where was he going? Would he leave this village? Konoe stood up. The poet looked back. Konoe had only called out on an impulse. Now he didn't know what to say. Will I see you again? Are you going elsewhere? It was strange. Konoe wanted to meet him once more, and couldn't keep from worrying. The poet regarded him in silence. Konoe looked down, thinking of all the things he wanted to say. See you. His sentence didn't continue. It wasn't entirely transmitted. His tail drooped. But the poet smiled at Konoe. He nodded faintly. Oh. Konoe's ears perked as he watched the poet. The poet turned his back and left without a sound. Should he take the nod as an affirmation? They hadn't exactly exchanged words. In fact, nothing had been said at all. And still, Konoe was certain. We will meet again, Konoe thought. It is kind of interesting, though, what they were saying earlier. About, like, the reason why so many of the cats are in gay relationships now is simply because there aren't any women, implying that it's, like, either a thing of convenience or people just choose their sexuality, which probably they mean the former. I don't think they mean the second. The other thing that was a little... It's kind of sad that they're portraying it as there's not, like, really any affection in those relationships. Like, is the idea that just that they're forcing one another, like, essentially, like, that they're forcing themselves on each other to just to get sex, to have rape? I don't know, maybe I'm reading too much into those lines. Or maybe that is exactly what it is, because I could see that as like a plot point, like, oh, when you fall in love with the love interest, it's like, oh, there's actually real affection here, and that's something unique in this landscape of forced sex and just depression and cannibalism. Anyway.